Hello there once again, friends and enemies, and welcome back to Weird Deck Techs, where I show you archetypes that aren't really used all that much and talk a little bit about them. Today's archetype is one of my favorites, known mostly as Nordic, or Aesir, depending on the type of person you are. Nordic, as the name implies, is a deck based around Nordic mythology, Norse mythology. You know, all those fun dudes from the new God of War games. That's not something I should say. Nordic is somewhat of a toolboxy deck whose big main purpose is to get out its big boss monsters from the extra deck, the Aesir gods, Odin, Thor, and Loki. Honestly, aside from that, it doesn't really have too much of a gimmick. It does have cards that substitute themselves for other tuners, kind of like some of the Synchrons do, and that's about it. Super simple introduction, so let's go ahead and take a look at Nordic. Alright, so here we have my Nordic deck build. And if you haven't been here before, here's how it works. I'm going to go over every single individual card in the deck, and in the extra deck, we're going to show a tiny bit of gameplay, show you kind of how this deck goes off a little bit, and then we're going to talk about my thoughts on the deck and on the archetype. So let's go ahead and get into it. We have Fenrir the Nordic Wolf to start us off. One copy, cannot be normal summoned or set. During your main phase 2, if an Aesir monster is on the field, you can special summon this card from your hand to your opponent's side of the field in defense position. If an Aesir monster is not on the field, destroy this card. At the start of your battle phase, change all defense position monsters you control to face-up attack position. Both players take any battle damage involving this card. One copy of Jormungandr, the Nordic Serpent, cannot be normal summoned or set. If an Aesir monster is on the field, you can special summon this card from your hand to your opponent's side of the field in defense position. If an Aesir monster is not on the field, destroy this card. If this face-up defense position card you control is changed to face-up attack position, take 3,000 damage. This effect can only be used once while this card is face-up on the field. Obviously, Fenrir and Jormungandr kind of go together, and while I wanted to build this deck to get out Aesir monsters as fast as possible, I kind of didn't want these two cards to be the focus of the deck, so I put one of each into the deck because I think they're fun. Two copies of Svartalf, the Nordic Alfar. When this card is normal summoned, you can target one Nordic monster in your graveyard, add that target to your hand. One copy of Tyr of the Nordic Champions. Your opponent's monsters cannot target Nordic monsters for attacks except Tyr. If there is no other Nordic monster in the field, destroy this card. Two copies of Alvis of the Nordic Alfar. If only this card is banished by the effect of a Nordic Link monster, you can send to the graveyard one Nordic monster you control and two Nordic monsters from your deck, whose total levels equal 10, then special summon one Aesir monster from your extra deck. If an Aesir monster in your possession is sent to your graveyard by your opponent's card, you can banish this card from your graveyard, special summon one Aesir monster from your extra deck with a different name from the cards in your graveyard. You can only use this effect of Alvis once per duel. Two copies of Nordic Smith Ivaldi. If you control an Aesir or Nordic monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. If this card is normal or special summoned, you can add one Nordic relic card from your deck to your hand. You can only use each effect of Ivaldi once per turn. Two copies of Ljósolf of the Nordic Alfar. When this card is normal summoned, you can target one face-up monster you control except this card, special summon one Nordic monster from your hand with a level less than or equal to that face-up monster's level. Three copies of Venatus of the Nordic Ascent. For Synchro Summon, you can substitute this card for any one Nordic tuner. If this card is used as a Synchro material, all other Synchro materials must be Nordic monsters. Once per turn, you can send one Nordic monster from your deck to the graveyard. This card's level becomes the level of that monster until the end of this turn. One copy of Garmr of the Nordic Beasts. If this card battles a level 4 or lower monster, after damage calculation, you can return that monster to the hand. Two copies of Tangrisnir of the Nordic Beasts. If this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, special summon two Nordic Beast tokens. So, helps you get a little bit of defense out there, especially if you're going first. One copy of Tanningnjoster of the Nordic Beasts. When a monster you control is destroyed by battle and sent to your graveyard, you can special summon this card from your hand. Once per turn, when this defense position card on the field is changed to face-up attack position, you can special summon one Nordic Beast monster from your deck in defense position, except Tanningnjoster. I'm really gonna mess up a lot of these names, and I apologize, I'm trying. Three copies of Nordic Beast Gullinbursti. For a Synchro Summon, you can substitute this card for any one Nordic tuner. You can only use each of the following effects of Gullinbursti once per turn. If this card is normal or special summoned, you can special summon one Nordic monster from your hand. You can target one Nordic monster in your graveyard except Gullinbursti, add it to your hand. Two copies of Mara of the Nordic Alfar. When this card is used as Synchro Material, the other Synchro Materials must be two Nordic monsters in your hand. 1 copy of Mimir of the Nordic Ascendant. Once per turn at the start of your standby phase, if you control a Nordic monster and this card is in your graveyard, you can send 1 spell from your hand to the graveyard. Special summon this card. 2 copies of Valkyrie of the Nordic Ascendant. This card is not treated as a Valkyrie card. When this card is normal summoned, if your opponent controls a monster and you control no other cards, you can banish 2 Nordic monsters from your hand, special summon 2 Einherjar tokens in defense mode. And last for monsters, we have 2 copies of Dverg of the Nordic Alfar. After you normal summon this card, you can normal summon 1 Nordic monster during your main phase this turn, in addition to your normal summoner set. You can only gain this effect once per turn. If this face-up card on your field is sent to the graveyard, target 1 Nordic relic in your graveyard, add that target to your hand. Moving on to the spells and traps, we're starting off strong in spells with Nordic relic Dropnir and Equip spell. Equip only to an Aesir or Nordic monster, it gains 800 attack. If this face-up card on the field is destroyed by a card effect, you can add 1 Nordic relic from your deck to your hand. 1 copy of the Nordic Lights, a field spell. Nordic monsters on the field cannot be destroyed by battle. If this card on the field is destroyed all Nordic monsters on the field. I keep this at 1 as opposed to normal field spells that I use, simply because while I think it's a good card for the deck, I think that it could be a big target, especially given that drawback effect. So having only 1 in your deck makes it good enough, in my opinion. 1 copy of Gotterdammerung. Target 1 Aesir monster you control, give control of that monster to your opponent. During your opponent's next end phase, destroy that monster, and if you do, banish all cards your opponents control. 2 copies of Nordic relic Hlidskjalf. I think I got it. Special summon 1 Nordic monster from your deck, but you cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck except Aesir monsters while that monster is face up on the field. You can banish this card from your graveyard, add 1 Nordic monster from your deck to your hand, then shuffle 1 card from your hand into the deck. You can only use 1 Hlidskjalf effect per turn, and only once that turn. Finally, ending the deck out with traps, we start with 2 copies of Nordic Relics Fallen, a continuous trap. If you control an Aesir monster, you can negate the effects of all face-up cards your opponent currently controls until the end of this turn. You contribute 1 Nordic monster, then target 1 Aesir monster in your graveyard, special summon it. You can only use 1 Fallen effect per turn, and only once that turn. 1 copy of Solemn Authority, a continuous trap. Activate this card by targeting 1 Aesir monster you control. It cannot be targeted by other card effects while this card is on the field. Send this card to the graveyard during your second standby phase after activation. 1 copy of Divine Relic Mjolnir. Target 1 Aesir monster you control, it can make a second attack during each battle phase this turn. 1 copy of Nordic Relic Leviathan. Target 1 face-up monster on the field that destroyed a monster by battle this turn, destroy it. Cards and effects cannot be activated in response to this card's activation. And last for the main deck, we have 2 copies of Nordic Relic Megingjord. Target 1 Aesir or Nordic monster you control, its attack and defense become double its original attack and defense until the end of this turn, but it cannot attack your opponent directly this turn. There we have it for the main deck. We will move on to the extra deck now, and we start off with the God of the Gods, or the Dad of the Gods, Odin, Father of the Aesir. He requires 1 Nordic Ascendant tuner and 2 or more non-tuner monsters to be summoned. Once per turn, you can make this card be unaffected by spell or trap effects until the end of this turn. Once per turn during the end phase, if this face-up card you controlled was destroyed by your opponent's card and sent to your graveyard this turn, you can banish 1 Nordic Ascendant tuner from your graveyard, special summon this card. When summoned this way, you can draw a card. 3 copies of Thor, Lord of the Aesir. It requires 1 Nordic Beast tuner and 2 or more non-tuner monsters to be summoned. Once per turn, you can negate the effects of all face-up monsters your opponent currently controls until the end of this turn. Once per turn during the end phase, if this face-up card you controlled was destroyed by your opponent's card and sent to the graveyard this turn, you can banish 1 Nordic Beast tuner from your graveyard, special summon this card. If summoned this way, inflict 800 damage to your opponent. Personally speaking, I see Thor as the boss monster of the Nordic deck. He kind of, in my opinion, seems like the strongest of the Aesir. But I suppose that is up to interpretation of whoever plays the deck. Last for the Aesir, we've got 2 copies of Loki, Lord of the Aesir. Requires 1 Nordic Alfar tuner and 2 or more non-tuner monsters to be played. Once per turn, when your opponent activates a spell or trap card during your battle phase, quick effect. You can negate the activation, and if you do, destroy it. Once per turn, during the end phase, if this face-up card you controlled was destroyed by an opponent's card effect and sent to the graveyard this turn, you can banish 1 Nordic Alfar tuner from your graveyard, special summon this card, When summoned this way, you can target one trap in your graveyard and add that target to your hand. And lastly, for the deck as a whole, we have 3 copies of Gullveig of the Nordic Ascendant. It is a Link 1 that requires 1 level 5 or lower Nordic monster in order to be played. If this card is Link summoned, you can banish up to 3 cards from your hand and or field, and if you do, special summon that many Nordic monsters from your deck in defense position. Also, for the rest of this turn, you cannot special summon monsters except Aesir monsters, nor normal summon or set any monsters. You can only use this effect of Gullveig once per turn. While this card points to an Aesir monster, your opponent cannot target that monster with card effects. Also, monsters your opponent controls cannot target this card for attacks. And now that you have seen the deck, let's go ahead and take a look at a little bit of how this deck plays. So here we have our first hand. Not the best first hand, but I can definitely see us doing some stuff with this, so let's go ahead and get into it. Starting, we're going to go ahead and set Svalin from our hand. After we set Svalin, it's important that we have a Nordic monster on the field, so we're going to go ahead and normal summon Zverg, and then we're going to use Dverg's effect to normal summon Valkyrie right after. We can go ahead and use Dverg to summon Gullveig, sending Dverg to the banish zone. Then, utilizing Gullveig's effect, we can go ahead and banish our Alvis from our hand. That way we're going to get a little bit of a chain here. So first we get Alvis's effect, we can go ahead and send Valkyrie to the graveyard, while also sending 2 other monsters from our deck to the graveyard. We're going to send Garmer, and we're also going to send Tyr, I believe. We can go ahead and summon Odin right down here, and that way we already have our highest attack monster out on the field first turn. He can't be targeted for effects because of Gullveig, and now we have Gullveig's effect where we can go ahead and special summon a Nordic monster from our deck in defense position. I'm going to choose to special summon Gullinbursty in defense position right there. Gullinbursty's effect activates when he is special summoned. We can go ahead and special summon a Nordic monster from our hand. We'll special summon Svartalf right there, and then we have a little bit of defense set up. We have Odin already out, and then we have Gullveig here that can't be destroyed by attacks. We also have Svalin set up here to help us stop any effects that might happen on our opponent's side of the field during their turn. Let's go ahead and draw for next turn just to see what we draw into, and we have an Alvis. Alvis may not be able to help us too much here, but it can still help us at least somewhat, so that gives us a pretty fine draw for our second turn here. So yeah, overall a pretty decent first play. Opening up, already getting out our Odin. Normally you can get out the Aesir pretty fast with this deck build, based on previous games that I've had with this deck. And that's how you play Nordic. So how do I feel about this deck? How do I feel about this archetype? Honestly, I really enjoy Nordics. They are one of my favorite decks if you are just beginning in Yu-Gi-Oh! And you want a deck that's simple, but you also maybe want to learn how to do link summoning, or, you know, if you're cool with the idea of synchros or whatever, I always recommend Nordic be a first-time deck. It is very simple to use. It's a little bit toolboxy, as I said at the beginning of the video, but it is a fun deck to use in my opinion. As an archetype, I feel like Nordic is pretty solid. They seem to completely understand what they have going on here with Nordic. I don't really feel like there's much I can do in the way of input. Obviously, if you're building this deck, you can build it however you want. I have a feeling that a lot of people that would build this deck would probably want to put in some more staple cards, but honestly, I feel like the deck does a pretty relatively good job at doing what it wants to do, which is getting out your god monsters. But that is it for this week's Weird Deck Text. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found something to enjoy about this video. I know that I had a lot of fun showing off this deck. I really enjoy Nordics, as I said before. So, once again, thank you so much for watching. We're going to be jumping back onto Master Duel Champion very soon. And until next time, as always, drink your water.